Good afternoon to everyone. Good morning to everyone, excuse me. Welcome. I'm Rafael Echevarne, General Director of ACI Latin America and the Caribbean. Welcome to one new webinar, in this case, a discussion panel on a very important topic, especially in our region, which is one-stop security, a topic that has been ongoing in discussion for many years. And I think this is the right time to go back to this topic in hand with ICAO, IATA, and all participants for the success of this initiative. On my behalf, I just want to thank you for your participation, attendees, presenters, and obviously everybody accompanying in the whole region. And I want to encourage you to participate in these webinars or panels because we do them with lots of pleasure for everyone's benefit. Without any further ado, next we have Marilena Sandoval, who is working actively with all of these stakeholders, ICAO, IATA, Airports Association. So once again, go ahead, Marilena. Thank you very much, Rafael. Good morning to everyone. Today, it seems to us a perfect time to tell you about one-stop security, OSS. And the last few weeks, we've been asking us, what's happened to OSS? The OSS would contribute to facilitate processes and provide great savings to airports due to the redundant security controls. But it's not implemented in any country. This is why today we wanted to invite sectors of different sectors of the industry to tell us about their vision, about with what obstacles we have met during the implementation process of OSS in our region. We will be presenting a small survey throughout the event that will allow us to have a clear position in order to determine how we are doing with OSS. To start with, we have the intervention of Mr. Fernando Coelho, expert in AFSIC, master's degree aeronautical science, work in OSS, who will give us a brief background how OSS was born and what the work is about. Excuse me, Marilena, some brief details before we start. The presentations, the questions, any questions of the participants, please send them to this email address on the screen. And at the end of the presentations and the meeting, they will be shared with the panelists. As you have been able to see, we have simultaneous interpretation. You must simply choose in the Zoom menu, you will find an icon, a globe, Earth globe, that says interpretation. Please choose the language of your preference. In case the voice of the panelist and the interpreter overlap, you can choose your proper choice, which is mute original audio. So we will launch the survey Marilena mentioned, and now you have the floor again, Marilena. Fernando, you're muted. We cannot hear you. Turn on your camera, please, Fernando. I have control of the presentation, the slides, yes. Also the camera. Well, we will wait till the end of the vote to see the idea that people have about the concept of OSS. I think 70% to 80% of the people have voted already. Now we can see the results on the screen. 58% of the participants, where the objective is to prevent a second control, that the passengers get off the airplane and cargo baggage once again. The application of this concept allows to increase the sustainability of civil aviation, and obviously it will reduce connection times for connecting passengers, baggage, and cargo. This system brings lots of benefits. It allows to save time and to diminish people getting upset. There's more customer satisfaction. The passenger has these benefits. Once he was inspected at the origin, uh, if they transfer to another airport, there's no need to once again go through all this inspection, security procedure queues, and to submit themselves to secondary inspection. The same applies to cargo. This allows to obviously a more intensive use of resources of companies, particularly aircraft resources and airport resources. It allows to, one of the benefits is it will reduce uh, the baggage that must be inspected. This will save costs, not only in infrastructure, but also in equipment and personnel. And obviously, it improves the quality of service to the passenger. Thereby, the concept of OSS, one-stop security, allows considerable benefits for the airlines, airport authorities, without compromising security of aviation, AVSEC. So the security or AVSEC measures must always be at the state level. At least that is the current concept. And this can be recognized by a single state, a unilateral recognition, or a reciprocal recognition. In this case, it would be bilateral or up to multilateral, and then we involve more than two states. These are the two current possibilities that are foreseen for the recognition of the AVSEC measures and implementation of one-stop security. Let us start then a bit with the background of all this. This started in 1995. As you realize, it's an adult concept. So the first discussion of the one-stop security concept arose on the 8th meeting of the experts group of AVSEC ICAO. For those that are not familiarized with this group, it's called AVSEC panel. This is a group of experts appointed by the countries, the states, that with good quality of experts, they meet once a year, and they discuss security policies and orientation lines that would be part of the annexes, especially particularly Annex 17 to the Chicago Convention, which is about security, and also for developing guidelines materials that will be part of the ICAO Security Manual, which is a manual that explains how the resolutions of Annex 17 must be implemented. So this group of experts in its 8th meeting in 1995, due to the initiative of the United Kingdom representative, he presented a study note where he expressed the need to revise the fifth norm 213, so there would be more coherence on the levels of security by the states. And here we have the norm since then, where it's stated that every contracting state will develop plans that will provide a standardized level of security. That's what the norm said. And the concern of the United Kingdom was to try to understand what this means to provide a standardized level of security, of ABSEC. So the problem was that the states did not have uniform security norms. We're talking about 1925, where Annex 17 basically was constituted by recommendations, very few norms. So that was the problem. The states did not have uniform standard security norms, and each one of them had a different point of view about what a hazard or a threat would be. So United Kingdom asked that the states should depend on security norms applied by other states. They were concerned about this, and there should be mutual trust between the states, sovereign states, that have signed the Chicago Agreement, where they must apply the resolutions of the agreement. So there should be trust between the different states on the security norms. So once again, United Kingdom promoted the need to provide a common basis that would guarantee this trust in ABSEC of aircraft that were traveling to or towards their territory. So it started in 1995, an eighth group of experts. Also, in the group of experts, we have some observers, some of your SEAC, which is similar to a CLAC in Latin America. SEAC back then, next year in 1996, considered that this concept of OSS should be a priority in their work program at midterm. The SEAC countries are 44, not only the European Union, but other European states that are not part of the European Union. And now with these priorities and their work plans, SEAC adopted a model of bilateral agreements, and they have encouraged the member states of the conference to hold these agreements in the near future. So this had the full support of the industry, obviously. It was a very convenient system. So in 1996, 1 year after discussing this in ICAO's panel, SEAC took the leadership in Europe to implement the OSS as a priority in their work plan. Also in 97, on the ninth meeting, there was a study note that describes the concept of OSS that was a bit different in every state. And there they defended that the implementation of the concept can be done in different ways. One is through the insertion of a clause of security control in bilateral agreements of air services. For this, there's a reference on how it must be drafted, how the text should be. There's a model of this clause in ICAO's manual on the states that want or in their air services agreements would like to include this clause on OSS, basically where the signees also sign the commitment to implement all the resolutions of Annex 17 of ICAO according to what has been foreseen in their annex and guidelines. Or on the other hand, through a bilateral agreement or regional agreement model between different states. These are the possibilities that were set forth by the groups of experts back then. After European concept of SEAC, once they declared as a priority the implementation of the concept, in a meeting of the general directors in 1999, the 108th meeting in Paris, they decided to carry forward a voluntary program of in the SEAC region, an audit program. The point was to set in practice agreements between the members of the conference so they could harmonize security measures between these states, accepting the implementation of the OSS concept. It would also allow the creation of a common security zone that could only be achieved if the states would accept the full application of the recommendations by all member states of the full implementation of DOC 30. What is DOC 30 of SEAC? Part two, part one is about facilitation, part two about security. It's a political declaration adopted by all states of members of SEAC and includes resolutions of security at the national level, airports, on aircraft, passengers, and so forth. Basically, it's what has been foreseen in Annex 17, but like recommendations, because DOC 30 is not a regulatory document. It's not a law. It's only a compilation of recommendations. But here we explain very succinctly how to implement the security measures from the national level all the way to operational level. So the idea of these audit programs was that all states would adopt these recommendations, document 30, part 2, as their national norm. So they would have a harmonized chart where all 44 member states of the conference would apply exactly the same security measures and then facilitate the mutual recognition. And in the year 2000, in the 10th meeting, after all this development work of the clause model of security in the agreements, very long, lengthy discussion, especially in SEAC countries about this concept. There they provided information about the first bilateral agreement that was established on the OSS that was celebrated, held between Belgium and Switzerland in 1999. You might remember that this did not continue because of different motives. I will explain. Because meanwhile, they were implementing this concept. We had September 11, and there was a change in Europe, obviously, that affected also the SAC countries. And the European regulation was adopted, and then it was not necessary to implement this agreement, even though Switzerland is not part of the European Union countries, but it has an agreement signed with European Union, where Switzerland, in terms of AFSEC, adopted the AFSEC implementation of European Union. So even though Switzerland is not part of the European Union. So in the year 2000, in this same meeting of the experts, they discussed the clause model that SEAC had already discussed and developed in Europe on the mutual recognition of the measures in order to introduce once again the OSS. And here they decided, the group decided to include in the strategic objectives of ICAO this concept. So out of this meeting in 2000, it came out as a strategic objective of ICAO. They had to supervise developing the concept of OSS and to promote the consultation of new multilateral agreements on the implementation of OSS between the states. And then in 2001, they presented the models, agreement models on recognition of security controls. And they presented memorandums, MOUs, basically recounting what was being implemented in Europe. And they decided that those agreements would be useful to go forward with the concept of OSS. And this initiative should not be just be limited to one specific region, but it should be disseminated at world level. That was the discussion of this panel. Once again, next year in 2002, it was reiterated as a strategic objective of security in ICAO, the concept of OSS. Once again. Now, to give you the historical framework of the concept, within Annex 17 once again, Annex 17 is the annex to the Chicago uh, agreement that establishes norms, recommended methods on AVSEC. The first reference on the concept appears on the second edition, Annex 17, 1981, where there's a recommendation that states that you must take measures to control the transit connecting passengers and their hand baggage. The first reference to some type of control that there must be to connecting or on transit passengers. And then another recommendation where the states must ensure that there is no possibilities of mixing or contact between controlled passengers and non-controlled persons. Now I call your attention to this detail. It's important for you to understand how later we had the evolution for the concept and a current idea about the mix or mixing, let's say. So the recommendation in 1981 was that there must be measures to prevent the possibility of mixing or contact between controlled passengers and uncontrolled persons. It states between controlled passengers and not controlled passengers. No, between passengers and persons that are not controlled. That's what it says. What does this mean? That back then, what they were preventing with this in this mix was that passengers that had been inspected would not mix with persons. In this case, personnel that had not been controlled or persons. We're talking about 1981. Next, in 96, 5 years later, those two recommendations became norms, and now bylaws, norms, and now once again, it's the same text. Nonetheless, now it's not a recommendation, it's a norm. And here it refers once again to measures to control connecting passengers and ensure there's no mixing possibilities between passengers and uncontrolled persons, between controlled passengers and staff personnel. That back then it was not mandatory to control 100% the staff or personnel. That was the spirit of the norm when we talk about preventing mixes or mixing between controlled persons and not controlled. In this case, passengers and other staff. In 2002, seventh edition of the Annex, we have another norm that states that the states should establish measures to guarantee that the passengers of origin and their baggage would be inspected before boarding. Since 1974-75, when Annex 17 was implemented to 2002, there was no obligation from the states to inspect 100% the passengers and their hand luggage. This norm only appears in 2002 after September 11. So we need to be clear in this. Currently, we have guaranteed security measures, AVSEC measures, where we all inspected passengers, luggage, baggage, and so forth. It's recent, very recent. But well, this was the first time in 2002 that the norm arose to obligate so that all passengers and their baggage would be inspected. And also another norm that states we will ensure that connecting passengers and their baggage are subjected to proper safety, security control, AVSEC controls. So every state should determine what measures would be applied to the passengers, connecting passengers and their hand baggage, because norms only demanded to apply this with proper safety, security. So that would be the prerogative of every state to define proper AVSEC measures. Once again, also in 2002, there's a norm 441 that establishes that it's mandatory to inspect the cargo baggage because it was not mandatory in the past 100%. The whole baggage. So in 2006, we continue with Amendment 11, Annex 17, 8th edition, and we included the concept of OSS and passengers and baggage. This is still the current norm that states that every state will ensure that passengers, connecting passengers and hand baggage is inspected before they board, unless that state has established an evaluation process. This is basically what we're discussing here in today's discussion, the OSS concept. So the concept that passengers, connecting passengers must be inspected only appears in 2006, 14 years ago. And this is applied only if there's no validation process. Here I must reference something to explain why we have this norm. This norm appears exactly to endorse, to support what was being done in Europe already, where after September 11, European Union took the responsibility of legislating and guiding the application of AFSEC norms, and they were doing this already. So to support this procedure, well, we introduced this norm in Annex 17 because we must also understand the importance of these debates so that everybody will understand why sometimes things arise, and we need to understand the political aspects of all of this. So since 2002, Europeans, EU had been applying this concept, but at world level, international level, ICAO level, there was no norm that supported what they were doing. So this norm 443 of the 8th edition of Amendment 11 exactly came in to support this. So it states there, unless the state has established validation processes, and the Europeans obviously have this validation process. So in 2011, out of the different discussions on the concept of OSS, there was a new recommendation in Annex 17 that states that the states should consider different arrangements, agreements to consider the sustainability of civil aviation, preventing the unnecessary duplication of systems, and those arrangements should have an equivalence, and they should implement, nonetheless, the OSS concept. But it's still a recommendation only. And then in this edition of 2011, it was the first time that a norm appears that encourages the states, so they ensure that people that are not passengers, read the text once again, passengers that are not, persons that are not passengers, it means staff or personnel, together with their baggage or luggage, are examined. And here they reference, in the current edition, it doesn't exist anymore. I don't have enough time to explain this, but in this norm, it states, if you cannot comply with this principle at 100%, inspection 100% of the staff, you must apply other AFSEC controls. Why? Because there are states that don't have this 100% possibility, because operationally speaking, it's almost impossible to inspect 100% of their staff. So this is why the current norm does not reference 100% inspection, because of this reason. Also in 2011, there's a norm 427 that encourages the states to apply this to the vehicles, incoming vehicles in restricted security areas, that they're inspected or they apply proper security controls. So until 2011, every state defined a percentage, risk percentage for the incoming vehicles to security areas that, for inspection. It was not mandatory in ICAO's norms. So basically, after 2011, with the new edition of Annex 17, all restricted security areas basically apply. If they apply fully Annex 17, it's a sterile area or zone. So you understand the scope. In a nutshell, since 1986 till 2020, 34 years, it took this time to develop a norm that not uncontrolled persons should be inspected. Currently, this risk does not exist anymore because there's a norm that states that incoming personnel in the security areas must also be inspected. So the current norm states that every contracting state will establish measures to guarantee that people that are not passengers or staff or personnel, together with their articles, will be inspected. The reference to 100% was removed. There's a reason for this, but there's not enough time to explain why why this was removed. Just keep the idea that currently on Amendment 7, the new amendment of Annex 17 states that personnel must also be inspected. And the other norm that states it will ensure that passengers and their baggage that have been inspected, they will ensure that they're protected against unauthorized interferences. This would take us to another debate, what not authorized interference means. Maybe in another time we can discuss this point. So if passengers and their baggage are mixed with others, here, in my opinion, it seems to me the norm is short. If they come in contact with what others, passengers, others that are not passengers, it's not well defined, and this could be interpreted in many different ways. But this is the norm. In a nutshell, it took 34 years since the first original concept to prevent this mixing until the current concept. Now, I will go a bit into the work of the group of experts, but into a more political level, which is the assembly of ICAO. And in 2007, in this 36th meeting of the assembly, there was a study note presented by my country, Portugal, on behalf of the European Union and the SEAC countries, where there was the reference to calibrate better, that we needed a better balance with aviation, and we should complement in 2007 the clause of the AFSEC model that would allow recognizing civil aviation norms. The Europeans themselves say that the safety model and the bilateral agreements can allow recognition of these norms. Why this clause could be used as a negotiation basis between the contracting states to foster and implement the OSS model. Why do the Europeans believe so? In the next meeting, 3 years later, once again, it's established as a strategy to promote mutual recognition of aviation issues, so the states will encourage OSS. And there it's assumed that the concept since 95, when it started being discussed, since up all the way to 2010, had not progressed too much outside the European region. It's the only region where the concept was in force, implemented, and functioning. Just to show you some study notes, documents that were presented in different assemblies, 2 different assemblies, and more focused. This is why I chose these 2, of the concern of EU, of the region, with this concept, the concern of Latin America with this concept. In 2010, Colombia presented a study note on the agreement for the implementation of OSS. And recently, in 2016, also Panama, Chile, Brazil, Colombia, Ecuador, Paraguay, Venezuela have presented study notes in order to implement and promote the implementation of OSS. So, well, now you know it's not new in this region anymore. It has been discussed now for a couple of years. Also, in the high-level conference, ministerial level, that was held in 2012, there are recommendations with today's topic, where one of the recommendations states that we should increase international cooperation in a practical, sustainable, efficient manner, respect sovereignty of the states in compliance of the bilateral agreements between them, that we must prevent confusion, duplication of procedures, and obviously to promote once again, mutual recognition and OSS controls. This just to tell you that at the ministerial level of the states and experts, this concept has been discussed now for a long time. And to almost finish, in the last period of sessions of the Assembly that was held in September, October of last year, a resolution was approved, A4011, which is a consolidated declaration of the permanent criteria of ICAO related with aviation. In this resolution, there's an appendix C on security measures of technical character that states, and the Assembly is asking the Council that the General Secretary will promote developing the process of mutual recognition with the purpose to assist the states, obviously aspects also relative to OSS that will allow them to implement OSS in the region. Likewise, this request by the Assembly to the Council basically is done. Why? Because currently in ICAO, in the Secretariat, they're developing this documentation. They have the full necessary documentation. We have Annex 17. We have the AVSEC manual that explains how to implement the resolutions of the Annex, and it deals specifically with recognizing the equivalence of security measures. So it's all there. Everything's written. There's no need to reinvent boiling water here. So last, I want to congratulate ACI that had the initiative to promote not only this forum, but also that they have a very well-developed toolkit document on how to implement OSS. And next we have my colleague, Nicholas, who will provide us more details. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you, Fernando, for your participation. Now we will launch a new survey. In your opinion, where do you have the more difficulties to implement OSS, airlines, airports, or the states? At this moment, we will introduce Mr. Nicholas Radlich, AVSEC manager of ACI World, who will tell us about the role of the airports, among other topics. Go ahead, Nicholas.
Thank you very much, Maria. And I just wanted to say thank you very much to Fernando for providing the very well in-depth introduction from a ICAO and national perspective when it comes to one-stop security and the history behind it. I will try and speak at a good pace so that the translator can translate my words in an eloquent fashion. So I am here to talk about what is the airport's perspective when it comes to one-stop security and what initiatives we are looking at. Next. Just going to go quickly over what it is, the different benefits, and how it does work, the recognition process, some considerations when it comes to physical aid you look at, and what are the recent developments from a global perspective that we have in place. Next. So Fernando did go into this a little bit earlier on, exactly explaining what is one-stop security, and it is the concept where transfer passengers, I just want to highlight transfer, and I'll tell you why later, and or whole baggage are not rescreened at different airport airport. They're adequately screened from the original airport of origin. So as you look on the graphic, you can depart from one country, transfer in another country, where not being rescreened based on agreements and mutual recognition that has been put in place between those countries before they terminate to the end of the journey. And that agreement has to be put in place amongst those three states. Next. Fernando jumped on this a little bit earlier on definitely for the benefits of airports. It can have significant benefit for airports that handle traffic in in large volumes. There are cost savings on the reallocation of resources thanks to not needing to rescreen transfer package and or baggage. Also, the passenger experience benefits are visible with definitely quicker and a lot less hassle-free connections for passengers when experiencing these different measures. As well, for major hub airports, provides that competitive advantage in that area to provide lower minimum connection times, and it provides benefits just not for the airports, but also for the airlines serving those airports as well. So again, it can eliminate duplicative efforts while promoting cooperation, and it does rescreening passengers and bags that have not been properly screened can stay in a sterile environment, providing more additional costs and saving time. Next. However, we need to ensure that airports are aware of the various challenges that are put in place when wishing to implement one-stop security. Airports need to understand that before undertaking this, they should undertake various analysis, either looking at a cost-benefit analysis, before recommending to your respective authority on wishing to promote any one-stop security measures within that airport. Next. Airports need to determine that the passenger throughputs and transfer benefits can definitely benefit through one-stop security at airports where it could be in place. The costs involved that needs to be applied would be put forward to infrastructure changes that need to be beneficial to the airport and airlines, and therefore, again, should carry out a cost-benefit analysis before recommending that their authorities to enter discussions with their respective states if they wish to have these one-stop security measures put in place. Next. From an infrastructure perspective, passengers that are eligible for the one-stop security measures should be segregated from definitely unscreened passengers. Airports will have to change physical infrastructure to create specific arrival corridors for OSS passengers and all other passengers to ensure that you have proper segregation. These segregations could be used as temporary corridors or permanent changes. However, if there's an agreement that can be put in place, procedural segregation could be acceptable. For example, you can have one-stop security flights arrive at a certain time, but passengers not mixing with others in the terminal building, and then coupled with searches of the arrival area afterwards being left behind. Next. And also in states where transfer passengers are required to prevent a travel document, screened and unscreened passengers, again, need to be separated, but also pass through a customs and immigration check. With one-stop security, it's focusing on security, but when it comes to customs and immigration, those are different areas. There's an area that has to be looked into as well to make sure that when you pass through the customs and immigration, that those procedures are still in place, even if you don't have to be rescreened. And then some passengers transferring to select states could require possibly rescreening at a transfer checkpoint. Again, this is one of the main difficulties in implementation is the obligation to separate the flows of sort of clean passengers from unclean arriving passengers. So from a security standpoint, clean arriving passengers, so arriving from a country considered to have equivalent levels, can mix with screen passengers in the same terminal or same portion. So this infrastructure piece and areas, this is what airports should consider when it comes to thinking of implementing these different measures when it comes to one-stop security. Next. So how does it work? We are trying to promote from an ACI World point of view that if airports would like to promote or in respective countries would like to start a one-stop security portion, they should contact their respective authorities and suggest which candidate airports should be within their respective region from in one country and another to discuss if a one-stop security arrangement would possibly work. The next step would then, the states that need to be involved would then have to verify each other's security procedures and programs to determine whether they are equivalent to each other. States would conclude this by a recognition of equivalence agreement, followed by the respective states that wish to conduct these measures would allow airports to be exempt from transfer passengers and or hold baggage of one-stop security. The one thing I want to put forward for sure is that this whole process is auditable by the states involved, but also by ICAO. So all this work must be documented. Next. Some frequently asked questions that do happen bring through is, does one-stop security apply to passengers or whole baggage? You can choose to do either or both. It can be as part of the scope. You can have transfer or screening exemptions in place for transfer whole baggage, cargo, turnaround searches, or you can have one or the other, or you can have all of the above to be put in place. So this is an area where you can look into. Next. Does one stop apply to transfer transit passengers or bags? This is where I think some confusion has been put forward. This applies to transfer passengers. So when passengers wish to transfer using the airport or transfer from one flight to another, this is where one stop comes through. When it comes to transit passengers are not necessarily leaving their aircraft. They're just transiting at this one airport and not leaving the airplane for fuel or just a stopover, and therefore it would not apply to that sort of thing. So if you have an airport that uses as a transit function versus transfer, the one-stop security does not have to be applied on that piece. Next. Does one stop apply to domestic or international flights? This is mostly international. States do often exempt passengers from arriving from domestic flights from transfer screening. When measures between the same country vary, the states involved may require rescreening at the main gateway before an international flight. So again, when I look at this concept and the toolkit that we put forward, it's more focused towards international one-stop security versus a domestic view. Next. Should one stop be in place with one foreign airport or the whole country? It depends. States, can take advice from their airports, should decide whether a one-stop security arrangement should exist with just one or possibly another airports or different airports within that certain state. So this is something to look, the airports and states could look forward to talking, looking forward to talking against. Next. And finally, one of the other questions we get, are recognition agreements unilateral, bilateral, or multilateral? And again, this is for the states to determine. Just giving a quick graphic on there on showing what a unilateral recognition of equivalence looks like and what a bilateral and multilateral recognition of equivalence there. And you can see with the bilateral and especially multilateral recognition of equivalence, there is a lot of negotiation and recognition measures that have to go in place between 3 different states and 3 different airports to possibly ensure that a one-stop security process is properly put forward. Next. So in looking at the recognition process, we have been advocating hard that airports would like to take a more proactive role in this function, and we are suggesting from the role of airports that priority airports and such within the respective states suggest to their national authorities as starting points of a recognition agreement. The airports in question between the 2 states do conduct the various assessments, risk assessments, vulnerability assessments, and feasibility assessments to determine that each respective airport can support such measures to be in place. and then determine the needs for any infrastructure changes to support the one-stop security, and develop plans for both short-term and long-term to support these changes. Next, please. When it comes to the role of states, the states have the 4 steps: the process of verification, the decision and validation when it comes to this, the recognition of equivalence, and then the continuous verification of equivalence. The states will have to review beforehand if they meet the equivalent measures through written information, either through audits or quality control documents or threat and risk information. The then respective states then perform certain on-site assessments of each other's airport. The decision, based on the decision process, the authorities will then determine whether the security measures in each state are equivalent, signed then by a formal agreement of MOU between the states and the airports in question. And then when it's been put in place, states then should notify if the other state, if there's any significant changes that could possibly affect the recognition afterwards. And these on-site assessments should be carried out periodically to ensure that the agreements that are in place are validated. And ICAO does recommend that be done every 2 years. Next. Just showing a quick notice of the graph here. If showing what it could look like from a one-stop security provision versus non-one-stop security provisions. You can see in the top part there, when disembarking passengers, if you have a one-stop security provision in place between the airport that it's at and the airline and the other country that it's come from, you can have disembarking passengers and screen departing passengers in the same area and be able to mix in that area. If you have non-stop security provisions put in place, all disembarking passengers from that area will have to go through to the public area and be rescreened before being allowed back on their flight, continuing flight. Next, please. Just giving some quick high-level layouts when it comes to a single-floor layout, that you can have a pier that is capable of servicing different traffic sectors with 4 separate corridors running in parallel, as you can see from the yellow and blue portions there. Next. And simple thing for the 2-floor terminal, when you can have just have 2 parallel corridors in place for 2 different zones, while arrivals can be handled on a completely separate level. So you can have if they have 2 different segregations on one level from different flights, you can then have them in the different gate rooms you see in there, but arrivals would then be handled in a different level altogether. Next, please. And I'm just providing a quick graphic and showing what solutions could be available, and showing the physical possible separations and infrastructure that might need to be put in place. Again, may need to be put in place to implement various one-stop security measures. Last slide. And finally, recently, just some recent developments from ACI World. We presented a working paper to the latest AVSEC panel meeting, which was supposed to be held in April. Unfortunately, it's going to be been postponed to December now, thanks to the COVID situation. But we've asked member states to consider a step 0 in this equivalization process that consists of airports possibly identifying different candidates for recognition of equivalence before approaching regular states in opening discussions and verifications, whether it could be unilateral, bilateral, or multilateral. The purpose of this step is a preliminary assessment of possible equivalence of airports by themselves. We are trying to promote our own airport members if they wish to undergo or go through one-stop security provisions. They can conduct their own assessments and then try and then reach forward to their respective states to move this forward. So adding this initial step 0 could recognize that national authorities should speak or ask their airports recommendations and possible for one-stop states for one-stop security. So we have asked the ICAO working group on working guidance material to consider this, And I believe as it stands in the current work plan for the 2021 for the AVSAC panel, it has been put in to discuss this further with the ICAO working group guidance material. So we are moving forward to allow airports to become a bit more involved, and a lot more involved, I should say, in this process if they wish to undergo this one-stop security measures. You can go to the last slide. And that is my presentation. I just wanted to thank you all very much for taking the time to listen. As Fernando mentioned before, we have just recently published our one-stop security toolkit from the ACI World website. I have provided copies to Fernando and his team at ACI LAC. So if you wish to obtain a copy of that, please reach out to Fernando, or you can reach out to myself, and I'd be very happy to send you a copy. Thank you very much for your time. On to the next.
We will launch a new survey. You will see it on the screen before Mr. Cerda's presentation. Do you consider necessary the implementation of OSS? Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. My greetings from Chile, and my director too. Thank you for the opportunity to recount our experiences with 3 states, Peru, Colombia, and Chile. We are working in this project that is very positive for the region. The initiative arose in a meeting of the aeronautical authorities of 2018. As a result of this meeting, the authorities committed themselves to look for alternatives in working in this one-stop security task in the whole region. In 2019, in a forum carried out in December, the high authorities of the states, together with the head of our airport, and Don Pablo Gaspariello, the AVSEC head, and the IATA authorities in Colombia, agreed to establish a process to establish an agreement project. So under this scenario, the authorities of ICAO in Lima assisted a framework for 2 states, for Peru and Colombia, where 2 Chilean experts worked simultaneously. My experience was to go to Peru, very gratifying, together with a team of professionals, highly committed professionals. It was a great opportunity to work with them. And there we launched this project that we elaborated this in detail in order how to implement OSS at the airports. I want to emphasize that we based ourselves in a agreement project, MOAG project, presented by Fernando Coelho, who's the forefather of this initiative. This recognition scope involves inspection of passengers, inspection of hand baggage, hold baggage between the 3 states of the region, and equivalent measures recognized by all 3 countries. What are we looking for here? Something very basic. very important. ICAO has been encouraging the states to have mutual agreement standards that will allow commitments and equivalent measures for ABSIC measures. And so there will be better allocation of resources and better civil or better aviation services. The region annually holds a meeting of the of experts, and this topic has been set forth before, and we are very involved in this task. This agreement is a well-known standard by everyone. This is defined by competent authorities. There's an inspection process established by ICAO, norms of Annex 17, plus what's involved in the ABSIC manual. What are the equivalence measures? There are many definitions. What was agreed here with this agreement? This interchange programs, procedures for civil aviation, analysis of risk analysis, developing training, seminars, workshops. This is very important. There must be lots of interchange of information. We're working hard on this, working on the best practices and on standard processes. And we have interchanging safety ABSIC aspects with the different authorities too, to look into the balance and standards in the region. We also coordinate extraordinary meetings in the case there are situations that will affect airports or paralyze aviation. The signee states also can share all information. This is open. What's most important to share information on threats, hazards, establish proper procedures on civil aviation information, which is shared with the states. So we must maintain confidentiality when the states provide necessary information to guarantee the safety of the airport, security of the airports. What is the scope? Inspection of hold baggage, hand baggage, and passengers. Our scope then is to inspect passengers, persons, hold, and hand baggage. Something which is very important. We will follow up through audits, national inspectors. They will annually visit every state to see how we're operating and keep the standards. These audits are very good because we can assess or evaluate whether we can have deviations, we can correct them along the way as a team and region. And finally, this must be signed by the interested states and by the competent authorities in the different states. And this agreement will come in force when it's signed. I want to emphasize that our team, they work with this technical assistance with the authorities of Peru and the authorities of Colombia. We have Francisco Guerra, an expert. I thank Mr. Francisco for his contribution. I thank all the authorities that welcomed us to work in this objective. Thank you very much. I thank ICAO for the possibility of giving us the opportunity to present this experience that has been very enriching, very productive. Thank you very much. Thank you very much to you, Eduardo. Now we give the floor to Mr. Pablo Lampariello of the Regional SAM Office of ICAO. He will be in charge of the panel, the facilitator. The panel is composed by Alejandro Restrepo, manager of Ajax Security, Pablo Aranda, El Dorado Airport of Colombia, Fernando Coelho, Eduardo Cerda, and as moderator, as I mentioned, Mr. Pablo Lamparil. Go ahead, Pablo. Before we start, Pablo, I've seen several persons have raised their hand. As I mentioned at the beginning, the chat is not enabled. Thereby, please send your questions to this email address you see on the screen. We will transmit them to the moderator. Please send them directly to this email address, your questions. Thank you so much. Go ahead, Pablo. Thank you very much. It's important what you just mentioned so we can work in proper fashion. We must have many questions. I suppose it's a very interesting topic, as Marilena mentioned right at the beginning. It's a necessary point or topic, especially now under the current situation and with the necessary reactivation of flights and for the best use of resources. This will help us for proper use of resources and especially, even more important, to improve passenger experience at this so we can prevent a second inspection to passengers or to prevent a second inspection point. So the virus will be not be transmitted even more. So I would like to thank Nicolas and Eduardo for their excellent presentations. Something well, this is important so we can see, people will understand what one-stop security is. Currently, I think most of the participants now understand how it works, and now they understand too which airports are already prepared and which airlines are ready or prepared to implement them. The Chilean authorities just mentioned they have been working on this project in Bogota in December 6th of 2019, and the first international forum on new focuses of facilitation of civil aviation. They signed a protocolary minutes on the implementation project on recognizing equivalences in the region for OSS between three countries, as he mentioned, between Colombia, Peru, and Chile. In follow-up to the conclusion of ARAC 2016, the 16th meeting of civil aviation that was held in 2018 in Lima, where the authorities were encouraged to continue the efforts to continue implementing recognition of equivalences. So in the meeting of the highest authorities of civil aviation of the region, they encouraged the states that they continue working in this project of civil aviation. Having said this, and with this basis, I would like to ask a recent question on the difficulties in 7% airlines, 30% airports, and 63% national authorities. So in this order, we would like to have, if you can tell us what are the ingredients that we are still missing, or how can we help to implement this concept in the region in such a necessary time like now. And then I would like to know the opinion of Joan and Eduardo Cerda, what they can tell us about this point. Thank you, Paulo. Good afternoon to everyone. I think the ingredients to implement a scheme to implement a regional OSS, the ingredients are there. I think I need to initially mention we have a role, an important role in leading and supporting, promoting these standards of the industry for the security of civil aviation continuously. And what we always seek as an industry is to uh, uh, get as close as possible to a very expeditious upsec, which is what we require currently, even more important at this point in time. Uh, the same as other initiatives like tracking baggage with RFID or, well, one-stop security fits in within these generic efforts. We in IATA have an important role in revising Annex 17 in ICAO, and here we play an important role, an active role in these amendments that are done through the security AppSec panel constantly. So, well, we must recognize the advance of new technologies, advances in processes, and the need of our members and the states to go back to civil commercial aviation uh, 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 to help it be more resilient, especially in AppSec measures. We need to look for ways and mechanisms to reduce vulnerabilities. And so AppSec processes are simplified that we've been discussing for more than an hour. So in this sense, or under this premise, we propose to depart from the basis that Annex 17 already allows to implement an OSS, and the proposal has always been to start with pilot projects or agreements that are feasible, so it can be achieved at short term. And here I mean uh, differentiate passengers and baggage. We propose to start with luggage, which is easier at this point in time. And we established this between airports that are in agreement to start with these pilot projects or agreements. Also, we need to mention our current situation of COVID. And I consider this is an immense opportunity to start to approve or to implement these pilot projects. In the past, our main argument, or one of the main reasons why we were working on OSS was because of the increase in traffic that we calculated would be increased in 20 years, even though currently it could be a reality. It's not the main factor, but we also have factors like today's challenge, which is that operations and their activities recover much more robustly and in a sustained manner. So with this in mind, the concept of OSS does not change at all. What changes is the reason why or the things we experiment now. So based on the current COVID scenario and what we expect post-COVID, we have the perfect scenario to start to implement these schemes. We have a reduced demand, we have less passengers, less movement in luggage or baggage. So it's a more manageable scenario where the risk is more contained and it's easier to manage. So the proposal is, let us put aside for the time being the passengers. Let us concentrate on luggage, baggage, and let's prove that we can implement OSS and that those learned lessons uh, uh, will help us this year. There's no excuse not to implement this by 2021. So we can start working with the passengers in 2021, but this is the right time to start the practices and pilot projects, since we have the perfect scenario to achieve this immediately. Passengers is more complex, as we all know. This implies different infrastructure. It implies more complex regulatory processes, but not impossible. So once again, let's start small with achievable pilots, and based on this, let's learn so we can evolve in the future and expand this to other airports in other countries and even to passengers in the future. Well, I stop here for the time being. Anyone else can have the floor. Go ahead, Pablo. Thank you very much, Alejandro. Excellent presentation. We would like to know the opinion of Joao, airport operator of El Dorado, one of the most important ones in the region, in order to work on this concept, to push it forward between the states of the region. Please go ahead. Well, Pablo, Alejandro, I believe it's extremely interesting what we've been discussing. I did not know the full story of OSS since 1990 plus, and I think the story is extremely important to implement these processes. In December, when we held the facilitation forum, I think I mentioned our experience, and I mentioned a word, pilgrimage of the process, a pilgrimage process of the passengers that they must go through. And I think with OSS, we must consider so that the process is much easier, pilgrimage process for the passengers. I was listening to Fernando, how in Europe, this process was quick and was very successful. And I was wondering, why was it so fast and easy in Europe and not here? And here I found a point of leverage that we have been discussing with Pablo and others, which is the importance of having a standardized regulation in the region. This would help so that the airports in the region can work on the same line. And the other is that Eduardo mentioned in regard to collaboration and cooperation. I think this is vital so that the airports can start to share information which is relevant. And as Alejandro was saying, this could help to provide added value to aspects in the region. This collaboration, for instance, we started working on pre-clearance. They were asking us to have the capacity to share the X-ray images of the baggage that goes through the airport. This type of collaboration can make it that this process is much more viable and easier to implement. And at the end, it will be a win-win so much for the passenger and the airports, because we will find that the capacity we currently have, well, if we don't have to process all these passengers that are connecting, we can duplicate or triple this actually. Well, this could be leveraged by technology, collaboration between states and airports, always considering that the end, the passenger is the one that will have the biggest win of all these processes. As Alejandro was saying, I believe there must be different phases for some airports. There are some airports where OSS works for cargo already. The next phase should be luggage, which we are revising together with IATA, and the last phase, which is more complex, which is passengers due to infrastructures, separation of flows, and the other we must keep in mind where passengers will be inspected, that between states there's no equivalence recognition. Basically, this is my point from the airport's point of view. Thank you, Joan. As you see, we have lots of information, lots of different political wills and wills from different people in the region to standardize this model. And last, next, we have Eduardo. Could you give us your point of view as authority? What would be the biggest difficulty that you're having to face this challenge? Thank you very much for the opportunity. Well, we have two scenarios that are in favor in our region to implement it. First of all, the audits we've had through ICAO, USAP program, we have improved response capacities for prevention and implementation of measures. And on the other hand, I need to emphasize we have an annual meeting, which is done with all outsec heads and facilitation teams in the region. So we are a mature organization already, where we have interchanged best practices, we have interchanged technical information, and most of the sectors and states are more developed. I think we are in a good stage to implement it. What's more difficult now? It's a change in paradigm. It's our mentality. We need to consider other factors. Another challenge or inconvenience could be that maybe many are right, that we need to see how we modify uh, when the passengers get off the plane, that they can go directly to the waiting rooms. This would be one of the changes. During this pandemic, we have not been able to study the proper implementation. And we need to see when this ends, how we can start to work on a pilot project, a follow-up project, to see how we are advancing, working closely with the states involved in this agreement, with lots of communication and recounting the experiences. Thank you. Thank you very much, Eduardo. Well, you mentioned the regional group, and now in regard to what Joan mentioned, the regional group is it's a group where we have all the region's experts, and the industry participates actively. IATA and others always send their representatives and give us their points of view. In this forum, high-level forum, we worked in a standardization forum. We started standardizing procedures, ABSEC measures with Chile, and Eduardo Cerda might develop a standard procedure in the region. The implementation is difficult by the states. Sometimes there's some resistance. There's resistance to new things, and there's a concept here in standardizing programs and so forth. But in this concept, well, we could be based on the Gazette, the global ABSEC plan, and priority number 5, sharing experiences between the states and support between the states. Here we have a working group where we are working on this, and we could have results. But this depends on the goodwill of the states. But as Joan said, it's necessary to start to work in standardization. We have a region with almost the same habits. 85% of the region speaks the same language. We don't have great cultural difficulties. We have basic harmony. So we could work on these types of concepts, and it would not be it would not be so difficult to standardize procedures in order to adopt OSS. I have a question for Fernando Coelho. You mentioned many of the norms. You mentioned norms, some history, how the concept was created. Currently, we have the norm 443 that states that connecting passengers must be inspected, or the state must have equivalent measures of norms for 4.4 to ensure that the passengers don't mix with inspected and non-inspected. 4.5 norm that tells us about hold the baggage or luggage that must be inspected, or there must be ABSEC regulations. As Alejandro mentioned, we could start with baggage or luggage to start collecting experiences. This is something one state in the region is already doing it, and others are working on it. Fernando also mentioned Chapter 11, numeral 11.10, recognition of equivalences of ABSEC measures or OSS measures. It tells us about best practices, recommendations of ICAO to implement safely these procedures or concepts, and a document edited by ICAO for recognition of basic equivalences with all these materials, everything that has been mentioned by the state, airport operators, by the airline operators. What can the expert tell us, Fernando Coelho? Where should we work further? We have some aspects already developed. We have a protocol to implement things. What should we point towards the future? Or what should we emphasize more, Fernando? Thank you, Pablo. Thank you, Alejandro. Thank you, Juan, Joan. Thank you, Eduardo. Thank you for your contributions. I would start by saying we have some semantic issues here. What do I mean by this? Sometimes we use terms and words that, with all proper respects, are based on fallacies. Because when we say that inspected passengers and non-inspected passengers mix or clean with unclean or dirty passengers, where did we find this? Yes, because according to Annex 17, currently in international civil aviation at this level, we can't talk about non-inspected passengers. Why? Because there's a norm that states that all passengers of origin must be inspected. So if there's a norm that demands that all passengers are inspected, where are we going to find that a passenger was not inspected? This is based on a myth, I would say, a fallacy. This is why I say it's a semantics problem, because we use terms based on and what is being said without taking into account the norm. The problem was to prevent passengers, inspected passengers, to mix with not inspected persons. This doesn't exist currently, because the other passengers that are not passengers, the other persons that are not passengers must also be inspected. So why do we continue talking about clean or not clean passengers, inspected or not inspected? Why? This is a false problem, okay? So I think the implementation difficulties are because there is a tremendous asymmetry between people, and on the other hand, with all due respect, a lot of lack of knowledge, because people just read and listen, but they don't ask questions. For instance, if we are among experts here and people that work on the system, if I would ask you, what is the risk? How would you identify the risk of passengers connecting or on transit? What would you tell me? And there was another thing mentioned. Sometimes there's confusion between connecting and passengers, transferring passengers. This is absurd. Passenger gets off the plane and transfers to come back to the same plane must be inspected. It's exactly the same passenger that represent a risk stays in the plane or goes to a separate waiting room and then comes back to the plane and then mixes with the passengers who are boarding in this same airport. It doesn't make sense from the risk analysis. So we need to be very careful. So in my opinion, what's missing is simply a will and work. If you remember in my explanation, the 95, in 1995 and 99, when in Europe the programs were implemented harmonizing norms, well, it's mentioned a lot. Back then, they approved DOC 30 references. that are still recommendations. The only thing that was needed is that the national programs of the states would follow these recommendations, all of them. And for example, currently, which is the region that is mature and well established with this system? European Union. So the only thing the states that want to implement this same system must do is copy what they do. And when we say we must harmonize programs, do you believe the European Union programs between them have the same national outset programs? No, I can tell you no, they don't. So we must understand how this is being implemented in the European Union, where this is a mature concept and what they're truly doing. Because sometimes we have an idea based on what we hear, and we don't have, we don't dig deeper what we are looking into, and we generate these confusions. It's true. This is true. Joanne mentioned this really well, and Nicolas, that obviously the airports must have the proper structure. COVID, as Alejandro mentioned, is a great opportunity to reaffirm the system due to the operations. It would be easy to implement a pilot test, but obviously the airports must have proper conditions to segregate the passengers coming from recognized or unrecognized origins. Because in theory, if we take into consideration the current 17 annex, the problem started in the 80s. 30 years have elapsed. And we still have the methodologies, concepts since back then, without taking into consideration what is current problems. When we talk about recognizing equivalences, which equivalence? What is the reference here? When me as a state, I want to recognize another state, it's me that I determine what is my criteria, because I'm the interested party. Because if I recognize the measures of another state, it's my reference that I must verify initially. I must verify equipment, training, percentages, whatever I define, because I will be the one that recognizes this first. If the other state wants to recognize this bilaterally, then this other state must establish their criteria. And obviously we must compare this where it matches or where there are differences. Where the differences, well, we need to fix them. But it's a state, the interested state, that establishes the reference, okay? Because if I don't recognize state A, not necessarily state A will recognize me, state B. So sometimes we use terms that are not proper. We can't mix, why? We can't mix inspected and non-inspected passengers. We can't mix them. If there was not a norm that stated that all passengers of origin must be inspected, then yes, we could talk about passengers that possibly have not been inspected. But currently, this is a fallacy, a myth. So to finish with my answer, it's exactly what's still missing, that people will understand what they're saying, and there should be a will here. The will in the region, there are states that are resistant. Well, that's their problem. This will apply to those states that are interested. The ones that will find out about the benefits they will have. Once they see that we're doing it, then the resistance will finish. But meanwhile, if there is resistance out there, well, we need to start working with those that have the right will to start. Those that resist will have the reasons to finish the main problem here I think, is the lack of trust that we have between people. The lack of trust is generated by fear, which is linked with responsibilities. The theory is that if something happens, I will be blamed, or I will be kicked out or fired from my work. I think, in my experience, in my work, this is the big problem: lack of trust and fear of assuming responsibilities. I give you the floor, Pablo. Thank you, Fernando. Very clear, very eloquent, your answer. I have three more questions, and then due to time reasons, we will have a brief reflection from each panelist. So you can have the opportunity of giving us a new point of view or reinforce your good points of view and how to encourage everyone to work in this concept and to implement it. We have reached the conclusion that it's necessary to facilitate this to the states, operators, authorities, to facilitate resources, the means, and especially the users, to give them more security and to improve passenger experience, eliminating an additional control so passengers will benefit the most and they will have a more pleasant travel experience. The first question, initially you talked about the European Commission. You were director of security in a European state. You mentioned your experience. You were auditor of the European Commission. The next question from the audience: why do you think it was possible to have a fast implementation of OSS in Europe? Very easy to answer: due to the historical circumstances. The first plan was within SEAC. The idea then was that the 44 countries that would take as a reference international program, the DOG 30 references could be part of this one-stop security group. Meanwhile, we had September 11, and the European Commission uh, uh, was approved to legislate on aviation. And basically, the first European legislation was to use the DOG 30 recommendations and transform them into law. It's true that in Europe, what's happening is that one regulation of the European Commission is applied automatically to all European Union states without the need of applying it to national regulations. It's law in all European states. And the European regulation has the requirements and implementation aspects, how they must be done. And they have the directives where we have the more sensitive information on technical specifications and equipment procedures and so forth. And there's the competencies of every state to disseminate this information to the interested parties. But in general, implementation is public. It's available, and also in Spanish. I can give you the references if you like. It's all there. But this was the advantage, to have a legislative framework standard for all. The regulations state that every state must have a national program, but the European Commission doesn't verify if the national programs are all harmonized between them. No, this is done during the audits, but there's nobody that will verify this. Why? Because the regulation per se is implemented in the European Union. Then there's surveillance, validation, as I call it. And once again, we must understand why this 443 norm. I explained this. They must be inspected unless there is a validation system. We must understand why this norm arose, where it came from, and I explained this to you. So on the one hand, we have this single unique framework of norms, requirements that are applied to the Europeans. And then the surveillance monitoring system. It's true, the system is not the way most people think it is. The European Commission has two types of surveillance monitoring activities. One is inspections. Inspections are done by a team of functionaries of the Commission together with certified inspectors by them at the national level, like ICAO. And then they visit airports, and basically the first day is for testing. So the visit is only communicated to the state. They do some testings to verify if they comply with requirements of the implementation. And then every 2 years, approximately, only a team of functionaries of the Commission will hold audits to the state at the authorities level. And basically, what is this audit about? It's in order to confirm whether the information that the state sent to the Commission every day, basically, if it's true, not that they distrust, but to confirm that if the data matches. Why? Because there is the responsibility from every state once a year to inform, to report back to the Commission on its quality control program, how many inspections, how many people were involved, how many tests, how many audits. This is sent, this is documented. Why? Because there's trust between the Commission and the states. So when you ask me what more needs to be done in the region to implement this, well, in our region, well, I would say is to have a document. It could be a national program for one state. For instance, there's a norm in Annex 17 that mentions the states as much as possible should change the audit results. That is the first exercise that I would encourage the state countries to do, to compare their results, to look into the differences. At the end, all states must have mitigated all differences between them, and they should have created a single unique regulation that is already created. ICAO already did this work, where you have differences and work on the differences, and to see if the differences have some relevance. At the end, they could not be that important. So that is the first work that you must do. Do comparison work between the states of the region, where there are differences, and you can take as a reference the protocols of ICAO's audits. It's easier. You don't need to reinvent anything. And then you need to verify, well, at the teams level, if 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 some detect explosives, others not. Well, those are problems within the states. What is the minimum requirement, mid-level that the states must comply? What types of equipment, teams they must have to accept this recognition? So I don't know if I answered your question, but it was Eastern Europe because it was already in progress. This SEAC program, when the regulation came in 2002, the program was being developed and implemented. So it was not that difficult because, well, it was a voluntary program and it became mandatory due to their dispositions. I don't know if I answered the question. Thank you very much, Fernando, for your good explanation. The second question is related to your answer. I read it. What areas does ICAO verify when they inspect or audit the state? Is there a difference uh, uh, between the audits and the states? I think this question is for you because you have worked in the European Union as an auditor or co-auditor. Well, if you don't, this is a question from the audience, the participants. Well, unfortunately, I cannot be too specific on the methodology the mechanisms of ICAO that they use in the European Union. What I can tell you, though, now I'm on the spot here. Well, no, just tell us if there are differences in audits for OSS between one state and states that are not recognized. Well, I can tell you it's public. In 2008, a cooperation memorandum was signed between ICAO and the European Commission. And so after this point, ICAO uh, does not audit physically the states of the European Union, because this memorandum cooperation that was signed establishes that the European Commission and their inspections cover uh, most of the requirements of Annex 17. Not in the same fashion. uh, I did not want to elaborate too much here, just to give you the idea. So what ICAO does in the countries of the European Union, it only audits those parts of Annex 17 that the European regulations do not cover. For instance, Chapter 5 on respawn measures to some aspects. The regulations don't cover this. So it's different audits. The European states are audited only in those parts or areas of Annex 17 that are not covered by the regulation. Nonetheless, there is a detail here. I mentioned this in my presentation, that currently there are 5 states: Iceland, Norway, Switzerland, and now United Kingdom and Liechtenstein, that, not being part of EU, do comply with ABSEC European regulations. But ICAO audits them because they're not part of the European Union. Nonetheless, their reference is the European regulations. This is a reference we have in Europe between the states of the European Union and those that are not part, but they apply the regulations of the European Union. And there's the others that are not part of the Union. They're only member states of ICAO. I don't know if I answered your question. Thank you very much, Fernando, for answering the questions. They were not easy, some of the questions, and they implied some personal concepts, possibly. Now we have a question for Eduardo. There's a couple of questions for Joan, Nicolas, and Alejandro. They're very similar, so maybe we can use them on your final reflection. What should you request to your authorities that you need from them, from your authorities, to start to apply this? But first, I would like that Eduardo will answer. Is there an established calendar when OSS will be implemented between the states? I know this can be answered directly by your state, but I know you're working on 3 states that are working on OSS. Maybe you can give us information in this regard. Thank you for the question. We are in the stage, well, with the pandemia, it was suspended a bit, but we're working in adjustments, in review analyses, and in a couple of months, we will have more information. Yes, we are in this stage. There's no calendar date, but it will be as soon as possible, even though it's a bit delayed because of the situation. So we hope as soon as possible to have it ready for the official signature. Thank you very much. Eduardo, for your answer. And all of us to work together and encourage the states in this initiative. And as I said, due to time constraints, we've been now working for 1 hour and 55 minutes. So I joined together several questions. So maybe the panelists can answer what do we need from the authorities to implement this? So I don't know if Joanne wants to start, or Alejandro, or Nick, and then Nicolas, and then Armando. Well, Pablo, what do we need from the authorities? Well, I think that they start the validations and recognizing the equivalences between the different states and airports. I think the airports depend from this at the end. And then the final reflection, I think it's important that airports like Bogota, where we are the last point of departure for flights to the States, we have an additional agreement we cannot leave aside. And it's that we still don't know how TSA will see that we have a process like this one, like OSS. And well, we would not like to implement boarding processes because this would affect the flows. The passengers' experience has many implications too. As an airport, we are ready, in fact, with an airline here in Colombia. We're about to start the luggage equipment phase. We've had some discussions with the authorities, but we need to validate. I think Eduardo is working on this in Peru, on the measures in each airport to start. I think this is basically my answer. Thank you, Joanne. In this regard, very good, the intervention. You mentioned something to share experiences or requirements from one state to another. Suddenly, maybe it would be a good initiative to take it to our forum and the regional group to present that there you're sharing state experiences and you have all the states of the two regions, so much SAM and LAC region, all states are there in an open forum of experts, and maybe we could transfer your question to this forum with a study note and discuss this point deeply between experts of the full region to see if we can advance. I think there we could find a gap to socialize this point. It is of great concern for the region, and it's not less important because to have recognition and to hold in some specific destinations would affect passenger experience and would affect the resources and costs. And it would involve additional tasks for operators, airports, and so forth. That we could discuss these topics in the regional group. Alejandro. Yes, Pablo. I think continuing with our discussion, I think we have the right conditions so we can start testing, pilot testing. This COVID crisis gives us a gigantic opportunity to start to test what we can start implementing. Once again, we as IATA, we can start small in specific airports with baggage and then expand to passengers as soon as possible. And you also mentioned, Pablo, that the idea during the virus, we want to prevent mixing or physical contact between passengers. They could infect the staff or other passengers. There's regulators must also continue our efforts. There's important work led by ICAO, regional work in the Americas. There's a one-stop exclusive group working on this. We need to work with them together with ACI and IATA. We have a common parallel agenda. So this is my point. We need to continue ahead and provide. This will provide great benefits to the airlines and customers at the end. Thank you very much, Alejandro. Very good intervention. Thank you for your contributions. Now, please, Nicholas, if you can just have some closing words or a message from ACI World.
There we go. Thank you again for this wonderful discussion on one-stop security and such. I think to answer the question that you provide, what do you request from your authorities? I'm just emphasizing, I think what I promoted before, is allowing the airports to become, and airports who are interested in wanting to establish one-stop security measures between certain states, allow them to be part of this process and not just arbitrarily have the certain states between each other just choose the certain airports that would need to, that they want to implement this thing. I think it's key that we should start the discussion and collaboration from airports, and airports between certain airports can start the discussion, start the process of wanting to conduct and have one-stop security measures in place only after the airports themselves internally are able to support such measures and are able to support the certain measures that they wish to put in place. The last thing the airports want to be held with is burdened with being advised or not advised by whatever its authority to put these measures in place because they were not aware of it and such. There needs to be a good dialogue, I think, between the airlines, the airports, and the states in a collaborative manner to initiate one-stop security, and states should be open to having airport expertise and inputs on what one-stop security measures need to be put in place, either if it's for passengers, cargo, or just bags. These need to be emphasized. And so from an ACI global perspective, it's good to have the airports part of this process involved. And again, thank you for having me on this today.
Nicholas, thank you for your intervention, for your contributions, and for your presentations that are very productive. They're a great vision, a global vision of the way airports think, which is very good for us as representatives of ICAO, of the states, representatives of the airlines, to know about the concepts, because definitely the last destination is you, the ones that must place the resources annually, the staff that must have the proper facilities and accesses are the airports. So you are a great protagonist in this sense. And if you provide us your support, if you don't provide this support, well, if you provide this support, we airlines and states can apply this OSS concept in the region. Thank you, Nicholas. Now, some closing words from Fernando. Please give us your last reflections and closing words. So, Fernando, as a state, please give us your point of view. Well, thank you, Pablo. I think people are already bored of hearing me. To finish once again, I thank you for the opportunity for this forum to explain a bit the story, the background here, because I believe now I believe that was my intent, to provide a more open vision of this concept. As a final note, I think we don't need to invent anything else. It's all done. I'm not too adept of the gentleman. I will mention that Karl Marx said that his history is already interpreted. What is missing is to change history. I think we can apply Mr. Marx's words here to one-stop security. Everything has been said about this. It's all written. What is missing is the goodwill and to implement it and change the history, I would say. What's important, once again, we need to revise Annex 17. What's important is to comply with the 3 C's: collaborate, cooperate, and I forget the other C, and coordinate, because the 20-year work of ICAO's audit, the amount of information that is available from the states, we need to use it. If not, the cost benefit of all these efforts are almost null, void. So we need to take advantage of the great work that was done, that is still ongoing with ICAO. Well, the states in the region, if they want to implement this, I've seen the 3 states that have signed this MOU, well, they should share the results of their audits. They should do their pilot test. They must verify and compare their audit results. They should check on the differences, how they resolve their differences, and how they harmonized at the end all their issues, and take them as a reference, and they should share with other states through the regional group, bilaterally, multilaterally, their experiences and how to do it. And from this point, test and verify how they can implement. Meanwhile, we don't have the courage to implement, so we can demonstrate that what we're doing is valid. Well, at the end, the question is, it's valid for whom at the end? Article 37 talks about this, that the state is sovereign and they have the power on the measures they implement. So we need to have the courage to implement it, take it forward, and come up with your conclusions, amend things if necessary, disseminate it, and expand it in the other states of the region. Thank you, Pablo. Thank you very much to you, Fernando, for your experience and all your knowledge. I think you have provided us really good explanations on this concept, on the possibilities we have to develop it in the region. Now, Eduardo, as a state ex-president of the regional group, please. You were president for 2 periods, so you have a regional vision how the 2 regions work, concerns in the 2 regions, and you have lots of experience as director or authority of APSEC in your state. We would like to know your point of view as a state. Thank you very much. Well, at the state level, our authorities, our aeronautics directors in Lima, Peru, they already showed their interest in this initiative. They committed themselves to start with this process, and they did it based on the reports that they had in regard to the regional meetings. As I mentioned a while back, there has been great participation in the region from these working groups. They contributed with projects and work, and this is in order to facilitate our work. This is why we undertake the work in Colombia, Peru, and Chile to start working on this commitment and set it in practice. I think we're prepared. We can make the change. It's necessary to have the change. If you don't change the way you think, you will not change your future. This is true. We must, I think the conditions are here. We need to work on the pilot projects and demonstrate it's working. Take Fernando's experience. He gave us all the orientations. And now, thank you for your support, Don Pablo. I think we are mature. We are ready to start. And this is, well, we're ready to go. I encourage the community participating in this meeting, so we take what's best from this experience and we start to think that this can be implemented. Thank you. May I have a good day. Thank you very much to everyone for your collaboration, for your experiences, for your excellent presentations, and you have expanded our knowledge. Just want to tell you that you count with the regional offices support. We are at your service for any support you need, for your coordinations between the states, to share your experiences, to share your concerns. So much for myself and Leonardo Ujoki, my colleague in AFSEC. I think most of you know him. A great worker, somebody with great ideas and great procedures based on his experience and intelligence. He will help us and is helping us. He was helping me in the organization and participation in this event. Well, we have some people that we don't see them today currently, but we will see them tomorrow in the development of one-stop security. Thank you, Leo. I would like to thank the president of the regional group that was following us online. He sent his contributions through WhatsApp. And I want to tell you that we count with his full support, so you can send your concerns, your ideas, and you can count with the full support so we can organize working groups. I would like to thank enormously ACI, LAC for giving us the opportunity for working on these concepts, for working on this specific concept in a regional manner. Thank you for allowing us to participate as ACI and the other participants, IATA, the states. And I want to congratulate you for this excellent event. Now I leave the floor to Maria Elena Sandoval, and she will have the closing words. Thank you very much, Pablo, for your collaboration in this event and all participants. Without any further ado, we want to thank you all and give the floor to the General Director of ACI LIC, Rafael Echevarne. Thank you very much, Marilena. Thank you very much to all of you. Thank you, Pablo. Thank you for your leadership in this conversation. This is one of the more important topics or points that we want for the region. As Fernando was saying, we don't need to reinvent anything. It's already, we know what we need to do. The knowledge in the region is present. We know about the importance of this, and this is one of those topics that is a win-win for everyone, for airport authorities, airports, airlines, and for the passengers. So this could only have a positive impact for the region. So we will always be here like ACI supporting ICAO in all states. And please don't doubt to get in touch with you. We will assist you in anything we can. Thanks to all of you, the public, and please send us your questions. Thank you very much. Thank you so much. Thank you, Nicholas. Thanks to everyone. Thank you. Have a good day.
Gracias, Juan. Thank you.
Thank you, Nicholas. We see you.